Missouri summer of 2019. Across the endless fields of Springfield, the sunset spilled gold over weathered wooden fences, wild grass, and the faded tin roof of the Cook farm. The air carried the scent of dry hay, warm earth, and something else, something quiet and unnamed, lurking just beneath the surface. The Cook farm had always been a peaceful place. A place where everything seemed constant, children laughing as they ran through the fields, cattle grazing lazily by the fence line, harvests coming and going like clockwork. Around here, people knew each other for generations, and wrongdoing always felt like it belonged somewhere far away. But that summer, everything changed. One sweltering afternoon, the Cook family's 8-year-old twin girls disappeared. They had only been playing hide-and-seek, a harmless game every Midwest child grew up with. But when the sun went down, their laughter was gone. Only the quiet stacks of hay remained, and a single pink ribbon caught on the fence, swaying in the breeze like a cruel little reminder. In this land, people eventually learn some things vanish and never come back. Springfield, Missouri, April 18, 2019. That morning was painfully beautiful. The sky was clear, the breeze gentle, wildflowers swayed with every passing truck on the dusty farm road. Jennifer Cook remembered every detail. She woke up early, fed the cattle, and carefully loaded crates of fresh milk and eggs into the truck, hoping to reach the farmer's market downtown before traffic. Her 8-year-old twin daughters, Kaylee and Kylie, darted across the yard like little squirrels. Their blonde hair tied with pink ribbons, bare feet kicking up dirt, white cotton dresses catching on weeds. They laughed and squealed as they played hide-and-seek, their voices carrying across the east field. Jennifer had turned back to remind them not to wander too close to the road before driving off. On the porch, her mother-in-law Margaret sat, knitting quietly, watching over the girls. Jennifer had believed everything would be fine. She returned to the farm at 12:45, under the harsh midday sun. The truck rolled slowly into the yard, raising a cloud of dust. Margaret was still there, seated on the porch, but the girls were gone. Stepping out of the truck, Jennifer felt the silence all around her. The field was empty, the hay stacked high in the barn, casting dark shadows that swallowed the light. On the east fence, a single pink ribbon fluttered in the wind, one of Kaylee's caught between two splinters of wood. The hours that followed felt like a nightmare that wouldn't end. Neighbors poured in. Police strung yellow tape across the gate. Search teams and their dogs combed through every thicket, every haystack, every inch of the fields. Flashlights swept over fence lines, red and blue lights from squad cars strobed through the night. But nothing. No trace. No sound. Day turned to night. Jennifer sat motionless in the kitchen, staring out into the darkened yard. The shadows stretched over the fields. No laughter, no footsteps. Only the faint whistle of wind through the cracks in the windows, and the sharp smell of hay. Nathan Cook came home just before dark, his shirt damp with sweat, his bag set down quietly on the table. Since David, Jennifer's husband, was killed in a tractor accident last year, Nathan had stepped in to keep the farm running. People called him capable, tough kind. But that night, his eyes seemed darker than usual. Calm, almost cold. Later, before bed, Jennifer received a call from Sheriff Miguel Rivera. His voice was heavy, measured. He asked just one thing: if Nathan had really gone to Branson that day. Market officials said they never saw Cook Farm's truck there. Jennifer froze, a chill creeping down her spine. By midnight, the farm was still and silent. She stood at the window, staring out at the yard. Headlights cut through the darkness. Nathan's truck again rolling slowly across the gravel. He stepped out, carrying a heavy sack over his shoulder, walking straight toward the old barn. Jennifer held her breath, retreating behind the curtain, watching his figure vanish behind the hay. A cold, wordless weight settled in her chest. Somehow she knew the answers had never been out there in the fields. They had been here all along. Jennifer stood behind the curtain, her fingers digging into the window frame until they went numb. Outside, the yellow glow of Nathan's truck lit up a corner of the dusty yard, casting long, crooked shadows of the fence and the old oak tree. He walked slowly, shoulders sagging under the weight of a heavy sack boots, crunching gravel, and slipped through the wooden door of the old barn. The hinges groaned in the silence of the night. She pressed her back to the wall, her heart hammering in her chest. She counted the seconds, then the minutes. Nothing more. The faint light inside the barn flickered, then went dark. Only the moonlight remained silver and cold on the corrugated roof. In that moment, she knew she couldn't sit still anymore. The kitchen was still and cold. On the table, the ledger lay open beside her phone under the dim light of a bulb. She thought of the numbers, the inexplicable cash withdrawals from the girls' college fund, the invoices for building supplies, ventilation equipment, soundproofing material, all scribbled in Nathan's rushed handwriting. Since David's death, she had been too numb to notice, but now everything was snapping into focus. Jennifer pulled on a jacket, slipped into her boots, and took a small flashlight from the drawer. She didn't turn it on. The moonlight was enough. The back door opened with barely a sound. A chill swept across her skin. The yard was still. She kept to the tree line, moving carefully, her breath shallow. The smell of earth-old hay and damp night air filled her lungs. From just a few feet away, she could see the barn door left slightly ajar, a faint sliver of light inside already gone. Jennifer stopped listening. Not a sound. She placed her hand on the door and eased it open. The hinges let out a low whine. Inside the barn was dark and thick with the scent of hay and dust. Stacks of straw rose around her like walls, the air heavy and close. She kept the flashlight low, its thin beam sweeping across old planks and wooden steps over bales stacked too perfectly in one corner. That's when she saw it. In the farthest corner, where Nathan had stood earlier, a narrow path was hidden behind bales pushed just slightly out of line, revealing the edge of fresh wood darker than the rest of the floor. Jennifer crouched, sweeping her light over the planks, and found hinges buried under a thin layer of dust. She knelt, slid her fingers into the seam, and pulled. The heavy hatch lifted with a groan, cold, damp air rushing up to meet her face. Her flashlight cut into the black below, revealing a narrow shaft and a steep wooden ladder. The smell down there was sharp and strange damp earth, mixed with something human. Jennifer froze, gripping the flashlight tight. In her mind, she heard them again, Kaylee's giggle. Kylie's tiny footsteps skittering across the grass that morning, and then the silence of that afternoon. She lowered the beam further into the dark. A small, pale hand shot up to shield its eyes from the light. A tiny face stared back at her wide-eyed and frightened. Then another face, clinging to the first, looking up. Kaylee and Kylie, both of them, still here. The cellar beneath the barn was bitterly cold. Damp air clung to the walls, and her flashlight quivered as it swept across rough concrete, lined with dark, dust-flecked soundproofing panels. Jennifer stood frozen at the edge of the hatch, her chest pounding. In the thin beam of light, the two children clung to each other, their hair tangled, their skin pale. Their wide blue eyes stared up at her, uncertain if the figure above was real. They looked so much smaller than she remembered. Their dresses were filthy, their legs streaked with grime, tiny fingers gripping each other until their knuckles went white. Their gaze blinked in the flashlight's glare, like cornered animals, frightened, yet still hoping. She dropped to her knees, her hand gripping the wooden edge, feeling the chill rising from below like a curse. That instant, she understood they had never left this place. 2 months of searching the fields, digging through brush, calling into the endless night, it had all been for nothing. They'd been here all along. Jennifer leaned over the opening, her breath ragged. The girls didn't cry or speak. They just watched her silent, almost wary. Then a faint sound rose from the yard outside. The crunch of gravel under tires, the familiar hum of an engine climbing the driveway. She stiffened, glancing toward the faint slit of light at the barn door. Headlights cut across the field, slicing through the dark landing on the barn. The sound of the truck rolled closer, slower, heavier, until it stopped just beyond the door. Nathan's truck, her body locked in place. Her breath shallow, the weight of every memory pressing down the invoices, the withdrawals, Rivera's quiet questions, and Nathan's calm, chilling eyes, just the night before. She lowered the beam of light, scanning the floor of the cellar. In the corner was a small cot, filthy blankets, a few tattered books, stacked neatly, a dim battery lamp casting its dull yellow glow. Paper plates littered with crumbs and empty cans lined the floor. CS. Everything was deliberate, prepared, like a room someone had planned for all along. Kaylee clutched Kylie tighter, her gaze flickering with something deeper, as though she already knew what was coming next. Jennifer swallowed hard, forcing her breath, steady, her eyes fixed on the barn door that was now rattling faintly under a strong gust of wind. She backed up to the wall and reached for the old pitchfork mounted on a beam. Its wood was cold in her grip, heavier than she expected. Outside, the engine went quiet. A car door slammed shut. Heavy, deliberate footsteps began crunching toward the barn. Jennifer glanced once more into the cellar. The girls still stared up at her, their eyes pleading, though no words came. She tightened her grip on the pitchfork, drew in a long breath, and sank behind a stack of hay. The darkness swallowed her whole, leaving only the sound of her heartbeat pounding and Nathan's footsteps growing closer. Nathan's footsteps struck the gravel in steady, deliberate beats, each one making the barn seem to shiver slightly. His flashlight beam swept through the crack in the door, cutting a thin white line across the faded wood. Jennifer held her breath, pressed tight behind a stack of hay fingers clenched around the pitchfork's handle until her knuckles burned. The barn door creaked open, its hinges groaning. The flashlight swung across the floor, pausing at the corner where the bales had been moved, where the hatch now lay open, exposing the dark cellar below. Nathan stopped. He stood still at the edge of the opening, his light lingering on the ladder. The air thickened as Jennifer heard his breathing, heavy, restrained, and then a low whisper slipped out, distorted and cold. "You broke the rules." He crouched slightly, one hand gripping the edge of the hatch, as if preparing to climb down. Jennifer felt every muscle in her legs coil, her heartbeat a thunder in her chest. But he never made it. A sharp, metallic shriek tore through the quiet. The pitchfork scraped hard against the wood floor, slamming down just inches from his feet. The sound snapped him upright. He spun around the flashlight's beam, darting wildly, before catching her in its glare. For an instant his eyes widened, stunned, then hardened into something colder, darker. Jennifer stepped out from the shadows, lowering the pitchfork just enough to hold it steady between them. She planted herself between him and the hatch. The barn seemed to go silent, except for the rasp of her own breath. Nathan smirked, a crooked, unsettling smirk that didn't reach his eyes. His flashlight slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor. The two of them locked eyes, frozen in a standoff. Neither seemed willing to break. Then his voice came low and jagged, as though it had been festering for months. "You never deserved them. No one here ever understood them like I do." Jennifer said nothing. Her eyes tracked his every move, her grip tightening. One step. He lunged faster than she expected. His bulk closed the gap as his hand shot for the pitchfork, jerking it sideways. Jennifer stumbled but twisted free just in time, the prongs whistling past his chest. Nathan growled, lunging again, fingers clawing at the handle. Dust swirled up from the floor, hay raining down as they struggled. His breath came in harsh, broken gasps, and his laugh, dry, jagged, filled the barn like a blade scraping glass. And then outside, sirens, wailing, cutting through the dark like knives. Red and blue strobes flashed through the slats in the walls, slashing across the hay-strewn floor. Nathan froze mid-step. His body went rigid, his hand still gripping the pitchfork. His narrowed eyes flicked toward the barn door, where footsteps now pounded across the gravel, voices barking sharp commands. Jennifer stayed where she was, her chest heaving, her focus locked on him. Flashlights blazed through the doorway, cutting into the dust-filled air, stopping squarely on them both. A firm voice rang out, "Drop it! Hands in the air! Now!" Nathan let go of the pitchfork. It clanged to the floor, the sound harsh and final. The clang of steel hitting wood rang sharp through the barn. The pitchfork clattered across the floor, spinning once, before coming to rest harsh and cold. Nathan slowly straightened his broad hands, trembling faintly, betraying the iron will he'd worn like armor all this time. Flashlight beams swept over his frame, freezing on his contorted face, eyes suddenly hollow, like a predator realizing its teeth had been broken. An officer stepped forward, snapping a pair of handcuffs around his wrists. The metallic click cut through the silence final, and absolute as though stamping out the last vestiges of whatever fantasy he'd clung to. Jennifer stood still, her breath heavy. The flashlights glared into her eyes, forcing her to squint. Her arms hung limp at her sides, fingers still tingling from gripping the pitchfork so hard. The barn air felt thick, dust, sweat, damp wood earth suffocating. Nathan turned his head as they dragged him past. No words, but his eyes burned at her, full of hatred and something darker, more wounded. She lowered her gaze and didn't meet his. Sheriff Rivera stepped closer, laying a firm hand on her shoulder. His eyes carried both sympathy and exhaustion. He gave her a faint nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that her instincts these past 2 months had been right all along. Outside, the squad car's lights flooded the yard as Nathan was shoved inside. The door slammed with a hollow thud, slicing through the still night air. Jennifer stepped into the open, clutching her jacket, her feet heavy as though weighted by the long, merciless summer behind her. Rivera's cruiser swung its lights across the grass before parking. Officers cleared a path as she walked back to the barn. They watched her silently as she passed, a quiet respect in their eyes. She stopped at the hatch. The flashlight still glimmered faintly in the cellar. Her daughters were still down there, huddled together like tiny, lost birds. Kaylee looked up first, her tired eyes still bright somehow, as though waiting for confirmation. Kylie clung to her sister's shoulder, bare feet tucked tight on the cold concrete. Jennifer knelt and reached out a hand. They hesitated at first. Then Kaylee slowly crawled toward the ladder step by fragile step. Kylie followed immediately, fingers never letting go of her sister. Jennifer wrapped them both in her arms, pulling them in close. Their breath was warm and shaky against her neck, smelling faintly of dust and earth. Tiny hands gripped her jacket tight, refusing to let go. In that moment, Jennifer felt her tears finally spill hot and stinging yet heavy, as though releasing every pound of grief that had crushed her for months. Far across the yard, red and blue lights strobed across the trees, the fence post, the worn-out siding of the Cook farmhouse, and for just a moment everything flashed bright before fading back into the dark. The squad car, carrying Nathan, rolled past the field and disappeared into Missouri's black night. And in that darkness, Jennifer held her daughters close, as though she might never let them go again. The Cook farm lay quiet that night, the red and blue lights sweeping across the porch, the sagging fences and the muddy tracks stamped into the gravel drive. Jennifer sat in the back of the ambulance, clutching Kaylee and Kylie close under a thin emergency blanket. The girls curled against her, clinging, as if they'd never let go again. Their eyes were dry now, hollow and distant, but their tiny fingers still trembled where they gripped her coat. The ride to the county hospital passed in silence. Lights flashed outside the windows, cutting through her thoughts in jagged, disjointed pieces. At the emergency room, they were ushered down a hallway under the quiet stares of nurses and strangers. Jennifer led the girls inside, leaving muddy footprints on the clean white tile. The exam room was bright but cold. Kaylee and Kylie changed into hospital gowns and were laid side by side on twin beds. They kept holding hands even as nurses wrapped blood pressure cuffs around their arms and drew vials of blood. Doctors whispered to each other, glancing uneasily at the girls' weight, the faint bruises around their wrists, the scratches and marks up and down their legs. Jennifer stood against the wall. Arms crossed her eyes, never leaving them. Her mind reeled images colliding: Nathan's wild, red-tinged eyes in the barn, the ledger with those strange withdrawals, his unshakable calm, even as the handcuffs closed around him, and his voice still whispering in her head, "You never deserved them." A doctor eventually told her that the girls weren't seriously injured, though they were malnourished, dehydrated, and deeply traumatized. They'd be kept overnight for observation and would need to see a child trauma specialist soon. Jennifer only nodded, her throat dry, no words coming. As night deepened, the hospital quieted. Jennifer sat in the chair between their beds, gripping both of their hands as they finally drifted into exhausted sleep. The steady beeping of monitors and the distant shuffle of shoes in the corridor filled the silence. Margaret arrived just before dawn. Her silver hair was disheveled, her eyes rimmed red. She didn't speak at first, just sat down next to Jennifer and laid a hand on her shoulder. Jennifer lowered her head, feeling for the first time in months some small fraction of her burden ease. But somewhere deep inside her, one thought still burned. Why had Nathan done this? Why had he built that cellar, stocked it with food, light, and blankets, as if it had all been planned for so long? And then the memories crept back. David's death. Was it really an accident? The way Nathan had looked at her in those months, before the way his eyes lingered on the children, his obsessive dedication to the farm. Piece by piece, it all began to assemble itself into a picture she didn't want to see. Jennifer sat there, hands still wrapped around her daughters, her hollow eyes staring down the dark hallway. And she knew clearly now her fight wasn't over yet. Springfield's dawn was unusually heavy. A thin veil of fog clung to the fields, draping the fences and grazing cattle in a muted gray, as if the land itself was still weary from the long night. Jennifer stood at the hospital window, a cold coffee cup in her hands. Below, patrol cars lined the curb. Radios crackled intermittently, carrying clipped, tired voices through the morning air. Kaylee and Kylie had been moved to a quieter room. Trauma counselors had begun meeting with them in short sessions. Jennifer stayed close, hovering just outside, watching through the glass. Each time she heard their fragile voices, answering some gentle question, her chest tightened. The memory of Nathan still hung over her, the twisted grin, the feverish eyes, his final words to her before the handcuffs. "You never deserved them." Now she needed answers. Not just to understand why he'd done it, but to prove this wasn't just jealousy, wasn't just rage. While the girls were in their session, Jennifer motioned Sheriff Rivera into a quiet corner of the hallway. Under the fluorescent light, his eyes looked heavier than she remembered, weighed down by experience and doubt. She asked him outright about David's death. Rivera didn't answer right away. He shook his head, saying last year's report had listed it as an accident. But his hesitation gave him away. David had been crushed under the tractor. Nathan was the only one on the farm at the time. He was the one who called it in, the one who stepped into the family's shoes almost immediately afterward. A chill ran down Jennifer's spine. Back in the room, Margaret was waiting, her silver hair disheveled, her eyes puffy and red. In her hands, she held an old cardboard box. She passed it to Jennifer, without a word, her gaze fixed on the floor. Inside were notebooks, worn thick, covered in Nathan's jagged handwriting. Jennifer opened one at random. Page after page detailed his warped thoughts about David, about her, about the children. Obsessions, plans, even crude sketches of the cellar beneath the barn. Then one page stopped her cold. David didn't deserve them. He never did. One day I'll take his place. With Jennifer. With the girls. And then they'll see I'm the only one who can keep them safe. Her stomach clenched. She closed the notebook, her hands trembling. Down the hall, Kaylee and Kylie were being wheeled back to their room. They immediately slipped into her embrace, burrowing into her chest. Jennifer held them tight, a faint spark finally lighting in her eyes. But inside, the questions still burned. How long had Nathan been planning this? Was David's death really an accident? And what else had Nathan hidden that she hadn't yet uncovered? Jennifer knew, with a clear, cold certainty, this wasn't over. She kissed the tops of her daughters' heads and whispered, "I'll find out everything. I promise." Outside the window, the Missouri fog still blanketed the fields quietly, hiding the secrets it had kept all along. 2 days later, Rain fell over Springfield, icy drops streaking down the hospital's tin roof, running in long veins across the window of Jennifer's room. Kaylee and Kylie had been cleared for discharge, but Jennifer didn't take them back to the farm. Instead, she rented a small room near the hospital, keeping the girls close to their counselors. At 7:00 a.m., she was already at the Greene County Sheriff's Office. Rivera was waiting for her and led her into the records room where boxes of old case files were stacked to the ceiling. On the top of one box, the name David Cook was written on the accident report from last year. Jennifer laid a hand on it, then slowly opened the folder. Inside were photographs of the scene: the overturned tractor, the deep gouge in the dirt, David's body lying still beneath a white sheet. The official conclusion: operator error. No sign of foul play. 911 caller, Nathan Cook. She stared at a close-up of the tractor's control panel, where the gear lever was pulled backward, and a handwritten note from an investigator at the time: gear appears to have been forcibly shifted. But at the bottom a signature affirmed accidental. Rivera stood silently at her side and shook his head. Nobody pushed it further back then. Everyone just assumed he was unlucky. Jennifer didn't answer, but in her mind, every piece was falling into place. She asked to see Nathan's property report from his booking. In it, along with the journals already collected, was another small folder: photos of the cellar during evidence collection. Rivera explained, "We found more than you think." Jennifer flipped through it. Numbered evidence bags filled with small items, pink ribbons, children's drawings, scraps of paper outlining the rules Nathan had forced on the girls. Twisted controlling rules written in his spidery hand. One folded sheet was set apart: a detailed plan titled "Our New Family." In it, Nathan had written, "Jennifer will understand. Losing David was necessary. When she's ready, we'll be here waiting. The three of us." A shiver cut down her spine. When she left the station, the rain had stopped, leaving behind shallow puddles reflecting the streetlights. She drove to the farm once more, stopping outside the barn where the police seal still clung to the old door. Jennifer stood there for a long moment, running her hand over the wood, feeling the faint chill that still seemed to rise up from the ground beneath, a quiet reminder that the farm's secrets had never been buried deep enough. She turned back toward her car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, the Cook farm receded into the darkness, but her eyes had changed. She was no longer just a mother who'd been searching. She was a woman ready to uncover everything, no matter how dark the truth might be. A month later, Missouri began to turn. The fields lay pale gold under the weak autumn sun, the wind whistling through the old wooden fences, carrying the scent of freshly turned earth. The Cook farm stood abandoned now. The police tape had long since been removed, but the barn door remained shut, and no one dared step inside. People said that land had seen enough darkness and deserved to be left alone. Jennifer never went back. She stayed in town with her daughters, renting a small house on the edge of Springfield. Every morning, Kaylee and Kylie saw their counselor. Every afternoon, Jennifer brought them home. The girls had started to laugh again, soft and hesitant, but real. At night, when they were asleep, Jennifer sat alone at the window, her gaze distant. A week ago, the court denied Nathan's bail. He'd been transferred to the county jail awaiting trial for kidnapping, unlawful confinement, child endangerment, and now likely murder, as investigators reopened David's case. The last time Jennifer saw him in a temporary courtroom, he stared at her, his eyes still dark, still cold, but empty now, as if even he knew the game was over. Rivera visited her a few times, updating her on statements, on evidence being finalized. He told her the DA intended to file a full homicide case over David's death. Jennifer only nodded, saying nothing. She didn't need promises anymore. That night, she stepped into the backyard where the maple trees blazed gold in the moonlight. The silver glow caught in her hair as she tied a single pink ribbon, the last one, around a low branch. She stood there for a long while, her fingers lingering on the knot. Kaylee cracked the door and padded barefoot onto the damp grass. She looked at her mother, then sat quietly at her side. Kylie followed, half asleep, curling into her mother's lap. Jennifer wrapped her arms around them, both feeling their warm breath against her neck. For the first time since that long, brutal summer began, she felt like she could breathe again. And deep down, she made herself a promise to them, to David, to herself. That summer of horror would never come again. She would never let the darkness touch them. Not ever again. Far across the fields, Missouri's tall grass rippled in the wind, quiet and endless, as though closing the page on this story at last. But Jennifer knew. A piece of that darkness would stay with her forever.